After a couple of signings, what's the state of the Sabres blue line? We've had a couple of fans asking this question. I think the top four is locked in, and I think the next two spots, 5 and 6, in the Sabres lineup on the blue line is completely wide open for opening night. We'll get to the Sabres defenseman coming up on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Joe DiBiase here on a very, very rainy Thursday. So maybe you're staying in, maybe you're hitting the treadmill, maybe you're just sitting back and relaxing, and you want some hockey content. We got some Sabres stuff for you today, of course. And I really want to dive in on the Buffalo Sabres blue line, the state of it. We had a couple of listeners ask about this, and I had planned on getting to the blue line in general coming up soon anyway. So I'm like, you know what? A couple people want it. Seems like an interesting topic right now that's on the front of the minds of Sabre fans that are thinking about maybe what's left in the offseason or kind of how it stands right now, trying to figure out what the depth chart looks like. So we'll dive all the way in on the blue line. The Sabres making a couple of moves on that front in the last week, but really not a lot of significant change, but a little bit of change, little bit of some investment made here and there. And we'll get to what is maybe there to do on the blue line between now and the start of the season. We'll get into all that coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Really nothing newsworthy. I think really what we're waiting for right now for the Sabres, barring some big top 6 trade, is that we're waiting for arbitration dates for Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and for Beck Malenstein. We'll see what that comes about as. Also, maybe we just don't get arbitration dates because maybe they just sign a contract, especially with UPL, who is the one that we're really going to be tracking coming up here. We'll do a more expanded thought on him coming up soon. $4.5 million is where I currently stand, but I'm wondering if Luukkonen, the further this goes, if he's going to push for more and more. If you want breaking news on any trade, any information like the Luukkonen arbitration or what the contract is when it comes in, and you want an immediate update, be sure to sign up for our text club. The Locked On Sabres text line, join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres to sign up. Got a couple of people that signed up in the past couple of days, and we were going back and forth with them. And of course, our normal listeners in the group that were talking about the blue line. I asked them, I'll have some listener comments on this. Today, I asked them, what do you want to see for the last 2 openings on the Sabres blue line if I give you that there are 4 100% locks for the Sabres defense core this season? Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, Bowen Byram, and Mattias Samuelsson. Now, I had one listener ask me, are you sure Samuelsson is a lock? And it's a worthy question. I feel comfortable putting him in that category because I just don't see his contract being all that appetizing to an acquiring team. I think he should have value as a player. I think he's a very solid defensive defenseman with the big stick and the big body. But that guy's under contract, Samuelsson, for $4.285 million until 2030. And if he had stayed healthy, I think you could overlook the contract and say, all right, I'm not worried about that. It's not that big a cap head. Yeah, sure, it's long-term, but he's 24 years old. I think a team could look at that contract and say, okay, not bad at all, if he wasn't so injury-prone. Right now, I would say even beyond Jack Quinn, the player with the most injury question marks on this Sabres team is Samuelsson. Missing 41 games last season, missing 37 games the year before that, and missing 40 games the year before that. We're talking about over 100 games missed in the last 3 years for Mattias Samuelsson. That cannot happen. He has to be healthier than that. It's just flat out that simple. You can't be worth $4.25 million for 7 more years if you can't play more than 55 games in a year, which is currently his high. Samuelsson, big season for him. And I think he's really got to show, hey, I could play 70 plus games. Even that, 10 games, fine. You could overlook that, but you can't be missing months at a time like Samuelsson has been in his Sabre career. And, I don't really know if that's going to happen. I hope it does. Fingers crossed that Samuelsson is going to be able to stay healthy. But let's face it, he plays a style that invites injury. He's big. He's physical. No, he's not delivering bone-crushing hits, but he's definitely involved in contact in front of the net. He is somebody that goes into the corners and battles on the wall with opposing forecheckers. He is someone that blocks shots. If you look at his numbers on that front, in the last 4 seasons, and this is really only 150 games, so really it's not even 2 full seasons. In less than 2 full seasons of games played, Samuelsson has 248 block shots. That's a lot for a defenseman. So topple that with 333 hits. Like, we're talking about a player that is very much going to have to prove he could stay healthy while not changing his style, because he can't change his style. He's not Dahlin. Dahlin delivers bone-crushing hits. He's been, knock on wood, able to stay healthy. If Dahlin ever had that problem, though, I think you could say, okay, dial it back. Dial back the physicality. You're so good offensively. You're such a good puck mover that you could take a step back in that department and still be incredibly valuable. Samuelsson can't do that. That is the thing Samuelsson is good at. He relies on size. He relies on physicality as part of what makes him good. So he's a big question mark just in terms of injury. But I do think the injury makes him a lock. I don't think he's tradable right now, at least not tradable to where you would think you're getting anything of significance back in return. So I think he's on this team. I think he's penciled into the top 4 going into the upcoming season. And I think you just got to cross your fingers that he's going to stay healthy. So it's worthy to ask whether Samuelsson is in fact a lock, but I think he is because he's a good player. I don't think the Sabres want to move on from him. And I think the injury risk is going to make it, if you wanted to move on from him, harder to sell to other teams. Mattias Samuelsson, contract, we're good. Bowen Byram, by the way, going into the final year of his deal, that'll be something to figure out as well. So the Sabres made 3 decisions on their blue line in the last couple of weeks. Let's start with their RFA decision with Henri Jokiharju. This is outside that top 4. We're really going to look more at like who makes the lineup. Because actually, before I get all the way into Jokiharju, let me just kind of go full circle on the top 4. They should be the strength of this team. There is, to me, no excuse for this blue line not triggering the jump that the team needs to make from below average hockey team to great team, playoff team. All the teams that are legitimate contenders are elite at something. Not even just great. They are elite at something. Oftentimes, it is up front. It is star players all littered throughout the forward ranks and like one amazing defenseman and a couple of good other defensemen, and that combination usually works. The Sabres, I question whether they're going to have that elite superstar forward. But that might be okay if Thompson doesn't return to Hart Trophy candidate and is just going to settle in as like a 40-goal guy, a great forward, not like one of the best in hockey, though. Well, that's okay, but there's not many models. There's not many models to be a legit contender without that level of forward, but there are some. Carolina is one of them. The Carolina blueprint in the last 5 to 7 years of their contention, which has been what? They've made the conference finals a couple times. They make the playoffs every single year. They win rounds, but they just haven't broke through all the way to the cup. So use them. That team does not have the superstar forward. They have some very, very good forwards, no doubt. Like they have depth up front, and they have guys like Sebastian Aho, who just had his career high in points last year with 89. 89. So actually, that's less, by the way, than Tage Thompson's career high. And that's who Carolina is relying upon as their best offensive player. Behind him, you've got Teravainen, 53 points last year. Although, excuse me, don't use him. Oh, that has been the case. He just went back to Chicago. Svechnikov is a little bit below a point per game player. So they've got some guys, but they don't have the superstars up front. They're great, and they also haven't had the goaltending. Frederik Andersen, fine, but like nothing that's been elite. They've been a great hockey team for years now because they have an amazing blue line, and they've had one for a long time now. I mean, Jacob Slavin has been a great defenseman for a long time. If you look back at Brett Pesce's career, Justin Falk, before he moved on to St. Louis, was this for Carolina. They've had, of course, in more recent times, Brady Shea, before he left for Nashville. Brent Burns, even recently. I know he's more offensive only, but he's been on their blue line. They've just had these rock-solid defense cores, great defense cores, that have really carried them, led the way to being a great team year after year. And when you have 2 number 1 overall picks on your blue line, like a Dahlin, who's already taken that step, Dahlin is already good enough to me. He's an amazing hockey player. I think a Norris caliber defenseman that is going to win a Norris someday, even if he holds at the current level of play. Behind that, you've got a number 1 overall pick in Owen Power. You've got a number 4 overall pick in Bowen Byram. And those two, I think, are under some pressure to really take steps forward. They have crazy good talent. Power is a number 1 pick. Victor Hedman-like comparisons. Victor Hedman-like style of play. But he's just got to kind of get the nuances of the Hedman style down. That's what kind of defenseman is Power going to be? This is maybe why he hasn't been that impressive to the naked eye in the first couple of years, is his value. He's not a flash player. He's not someone you're ever going to turn the highlight reel on for. He's not going coast to coast. He's not delivering these bone-crushing hits. He doesn't have this giant slap shot. What made him so great as a prospect was his ability to control a game. And there's a lot of mental stuff that comes with that. There's a lot of nuances of the game and understanding of the pro game that comes with that type of defenseman. And I think there's a reason why a Victor Hedman, who is often the guy I will compare Power to the most as like what he could become and what the blueprint is, or what the blueprint is for Owen Power. Hedman also had a really slow start to his career. I mean, you look at the first 4 years of his career, he was a very good defenseman, but the numbers certainly weren't there. He never cracked 26 points in his first full season, 4 seasons, before taking off a little bit more. He had never received a Norris vote in his first 4 seasons, did in his 5th season, and then has basically received them every year since. Like, Hedman really took off as that elite level defenseman at 23 years old. I mean, I hope Power is able to do it a little sooner than that, right? Because if Hedman took off at 23, I mean, that's 2 more years from now for Owen Power. And I don't know how much patience Sabre fans are going to have for Owen Power on that front. I mean, they might not matter. He's under contract. He's not going anywhere. But Power taking a step forward at some point. And then Byram, I mean, Byram's at an age where that should happen. You know, full off season with a new team. He's got all that offensive ability. He appears to have at least settled in post-concussion here. He had those concussion issues in Colorado. He was able to play 73 games last year, full off season. I don't know what's going on in his personal life. I don't know what he's dealing with headache-wise. Athletes are not going to tell you a lot of that stuff until they're done playing. So my hope in Byram's case is that he hasn't been dealing with those post-concussion syndrome stuff. He doesn't give any indication that he is. But beyond that, he's someone you want to see that big step from. Can you be, I mean, when the Avalanche went to the finals, he was stud defenseman. Like, he was big part of their team, 21, 22 minutes a night, playoff performer. Sure, Cale Makar was a lot better than him, but he was still a very, very good offensive defenseman for Colorado. And on this team, I mean, I don't need him to be the number 1 defenseman. I don't even be the number 2 defenseman if Owen Power were to take a step forward at some point. I mean, just got to be a very good number 3. And if you get Power and Byram to take big steps forward with Dahlin as the number one. And if Samuelsson can stay healthy, like that top four has the potential. I know it's that scary P word that nobody wants to hear anymore. I don't want to hear it either. But I got to sell my optimism on something. And for that blue line, I think they have the potential to be a blue line like Carolina's had that is the thing that carries the hockey team to the playoffs. It is the thing that allows them to be a Stanley Cup contender. But they're going to need, again, Byram to take that big step forward, Power to take that big step forward, and Samuelsson to stay healthy to get that. Now, what about for this year? Because those three are locked in. Samuelsson, as I told you, I think is locked in too. What about the other two guys? What they've done with Jokiharju, what they've done with Dennis Gilbert, what they've done with Jacob Bryson, and what about Ryan Johnson, the forgotten man in all of this? We'll get to the other two spots and what that should look like when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented here on the show by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive. ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for listening. And if you are looking for, when you're done here, maybe a little Olympic basketball previewing stuff, you've got football training camp right around the corner. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today if you're sick of all that shouting on Fox Sports or ESPN. Locked On Sports Today, free 24/7 streaming channel, available on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So, let's get into it on the bottom end of the blue line for this season. Very interesting for what the bottom pair, those last two spots, who's going to win those last two spots between now and opening night? And this is the question I asked our texters today. Join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres if you want to sign up to become a texter. All right, 4 locks. Who gets the other 2 spots? Who would you give the other 2 spots to? Right now, in your best case scenario, who would get it? And your options, I think, are most definitely Henri Jokiharju, Connor Clifton, Dennis Gilbert, Jacob Bryson, and Ryan Johnson. 5 guys for 2 spots. Now, let me start, though, with Jokiharju. If Jokiharju is on the team come October, I think he's in it. I think he's almost undoubtedly in it. I mean, I guess he could be a scratch guy, but I don't think so. There were a few times last year, even in the past couple of years, where he was a healthy scratch, but it was pretty rare. Like, he's almost always in the lineup when he's healthy. The question for me about Jokiharju isn't about does he win a job out of training camp. It's if he's even on the roster. 1-year deal the Sabres brought him in on. $3.1 million as a restricted free agent, which means at his age, 25, the games he's played, that next season he will be an unrestricted free agent. Now, on our last show, at the end when we were talking about Peyton Krebs and trade ideas that I have for Peyton Krebs, the idea I gave you was Krebs and Jokiharju to Philadelphia for Joel Farabee. Now, Jokiharju to me is a fine player. It depends where you look. My eyes last year, I liked his game. I thought that he was pretty stable. I thought that he did some nice things. I thought he was put in a lot of defensive situations that might have impacted his numbers, but his advanced numbers were really bad. Like one of the worst defensemen on the team last season for Henri Jokiharju. If you look at Evolving Hockey, and I was looking today at goals above replacement, which is one metric that they use over there at Evolving Hockey. And I'll show that to you on our YouTube channel if you're watching along. If you look at the Sabres goals above replacement numbers, on the whole team last year. You see Dahlin way up there at the top. Look at that chart all the way to the right. The blue bar, that's goals above replacement for offense. The orange bar for defense. Power play is pink, and then blue is shorthanded. And I'm going down. There's Dahlin at the top, right? And then, hey, look, there's Jacob Bryson, by the way. We'll get to that. Number 2 for defenseman, really high up there. Again, we'll get to that. There's Samuelson looking pretty good. Power's looking pretty good. Power, interestingly, though, like a lot of good and a lot of bad, but that brings him about to the middle. Ryan Johnson in the middle, kind of a low event player. And then still scrolling down, and they're way at the bottom, even below Connor Clifton, is Henri Jokiharju. Interesting. Like, not a guy I thought in really evolving hockey has his offensive goals above replacement as the thing that kills him the most. Just not providing much at all offensively. Defense, it's not that bad, but it's not also good. So what am I to make of that? I mean, there's situational stuff there, but I'm someone that likes to trust the numbers, especially when there's a player like a Jokiharju who is not someone you're going to notice a lot, right? Like, we're use the word nuance for Power's game someday. Like, that to me is Jokiharju also. To understand his game, you got to really dig in on the film. You got to really dig in on what his role is. And I trust the numbers on players like that, defensemen like that, and Jokiharju does not grade out well. At the same time, I also think he is a player, because he's a right shot defenseman and he's only 25 years old, would carry value in the league. And you have contract control, right? 1-year deal. You might think you get an extension done with him and kind of bring him in on your terms if you're another team. And again, right shot defensemen are getting rare. I don't know why that's happening, but it's happening. Rarer and rarer is the right shot defenseman, especially the top 4 guy. I bet for sure I could find a team that I can sell on Henri Jokiharju being a top 4, a second pair right shot defenseman. And let me go send him to that team before I lose him for nothing in a year. So for me, I think the best thing to do with Jokiharju is to trade him. That's what I would do, especially when there are other options on the team right now. We'll get to the guys that they brought back, Bryson, or signed, Dennis Gilbert, coming up in the third segment of today's show. But one other name that kind of goes under the radar that I'm not going to lie, I did an exercise with Sal Capaccio and WGR earlier in the week where we filled out our opening night lineups and we did our forwards. And then we got to our defensemen. And we're going through our defensemen, and we talked about Jokiharju, and we talked about Gilbert, we talked about Bryson, we talked about Clifton, and we did the whole thing, the whole segment. We debated different ideas, and not one time did we even say the name Ryan Johnson. That's my fault, right? Like, I just didn't have, I guess, the depth chart far enough in front of me, or scrolled down enough. We didn't even mention Ryan Johnson, and a listener immediately was like, "Hey, what about Ryan Johnson for this?" And I thought, like, oh yeah, wait a minute. I guess he's number 9 on the depth chart right now, but what are we doing with him? Because Johnson was getting rave reviews in Rochester and before last year, and he kind of played a weird role for the Sabres where he was in the lineup kind of every other night. By the way, the Amex reviews were last year, right? Because he was still in Minnesota the year before that. So I'm thinking of last year, the Rochester reviews. But there were a lot of numbers guys that liked him last year. I mentioned he was kind of middle of the pack on those goals above replacement numbers. He wasn't great. He wasn't terrible either. Kind of in the middle, like not a very high event player. Only played 13.51 a night. Like, he didn't play a lot also. Protected minutes a little bit on Ryan Johnson's front. But I don't know, like, I like the player. I like what I see in terms of his ability as a passer. I think he sees the ice well. I think he has good vision. There's just not a lot of pop there. You know what I mean? Like, he, I think, will be a good third pair defenseman in this league, and maybe even like a good second power play defenseman. Not on this team because they don't need that. But he could have that ability too. He's at a point though now where you're July 24th is his birthday. So at the start of the year, he'll be 23 years old. This is his age 23 season. I mean, it's go time, man. Like, if you're not making the league at 23, like, I got to start questioning whether you're ever going to be a regular in the NHL. And if I've seen steps from him last year, which I think I did, he got a taste of the NHL. He looked pretty good. He went down to Rochester and was pretty good. All right. Now's the time you make the NHL team. Now's the time when Ryan Johnsons of the world show up to training camp and win a spot. Sure, it's crowded, but it's Dennis Gilbert, Jacob Bryson, Connor Clifton. If you're a first-round defenseman like Ryan Johnson was, and you've got good ability, and you've done all your development, you went through college 4 years, and you got a year where you played half in the NHL, half in the AHL, and did pretty well at both, then the next year after that, the natural progression is you make the NHL. You beat out those seventh defenseman types, and you're in the lineup. That's what I'm going to want to see from Ryan Johnson in training camp. Because if he doesn't do that, then I'm going to start questioning whether he's ever going to be a regular NHLer, at least on this team. So Johnson's interesting, but I can't pencil him in right now. I mean, they've treated the depth chart like he's going to be in Rochester again. But we'll see. He's a big we'll see on this front, because I feel like for him, it's up to camp and preseason. Like, it's completely up to what kind of camp and preseason he has. And if he has so one, then maybe they send him back to Rochester. If he looks awesome, then I bet he should. I'd say he should beat out all those other guys. What about all those other guys? Clifton, Gilbert, Bryson. Very different situations to me on all three. We'll get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We try to figure out the totality of the Sabres blue line, the state of their defense core. That's coming back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We're brought to you here on the show by Gametime. So I'm actually going to a concert tonight, Chris Stapleton at Darien Lake. And if I'm not doing this because I already have tickets, but when I was looking for tickets, where was I looking? Gametime. And if you want to look last minute, still tickets available, and you can look at them on the app. Really good acts. If you don't even have to be a country fan to like Chris Stapleton, because he's got that bluesy type of feel as well. And if you're looking for last minute tickets, I mean, Gametime is the place to do it. Tickets are available sometimes after the event even begins. And certainly you're going to save a lot of money buying last minute, save up to 60% buying last minute for sports. Also, concerts, as I mentioned, comedy, theater as well are available on Gametime. They're an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. If this summer you're looking to take a quick trip down to Pittsburgh or up to Toronto or over to Cleveland, then check out Gametime, authorized ticket marketplace of MLB tickets. Lowest price guarantee. Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets elsewhere for less. Your ticket is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets and all other tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Hey, you want to go to that concert? You never used Gametime today? You get $20 off for tonight's gig. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Final segment here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. All right, we're figuring out the Sabres blue line. To the top four, Ryan Johnson, who I would not pencil into the top six right now, but I think is very interesting as a kind of a wild card for the top six going into opening night. How about the other veteran guys? So let's start with Connor Clifton. Connor Clifton is under contract. The Sabres signed him last year to a 3-year deal, $3.33 million per year. So he's got this year and next year remaining at that cap hit. That's a bad contract. Now that Jeff Skinner is off their books, Clifton at $3.33 million, I think I would want to say is their worst contract. He's the worst contract on the team. How is he a horrible player? I don't think he's a horrible player. I just don't think he helps you all that much. I don't really think he does a lot for you. I mean, he is a decent penalty killer. He is a shot blocker. He's a physical guy. He's not all that big, but he's going to throw his body around. He's going to throw his weight around. But I think the concerns that we saw or heard from Boston 2 years ago, or last year when they signed him, was, well, this guy was a healthy scratch in Boston sometimes. This guy was a third pair defenseman that they really didn't want ever playing in the top four. And then the Sabres signed Clifton with the idea that he could maybe step into the top four, and that just definitely was not happening. Definitely was not happening. So what'd you get last year? You got a player that, by evolving hockey numbers, his overall percentile as an offensive defenseman was the 39th percentile, and defensively was the 18th percentile. And shorthanded defense, he didn't give you the impact that you might have been hoping for. So Clifton, to me, if it was based on merit, I'd like to see him beaten out for the top six. If I were putting together my lineup and I were taking politics out of it, which in this case would be the contract, right? You might feel a little beholden to make it work or to try it again, at least. Like, hey, let's at least try it again. Let's see if we can get something out of this before we call it a complete failure and complete loss. If it was just on potential, if it's just on playing and give me the best results possible, I would not have Clifton in my top 6. I think I'd predict right now he will be in their top 6, but I would not have Clifton in my top 6. I might have Johnson over him just to see what I got there. I might have Jacob Bryson above him. So the Sabres doing two things in free agency. They signed Dennis Gilbert to a 1-year deal for less than $1 million, and they also sign Bryson to a 1-year deal for $900,000, which was less than he was going to be tendered for being an RFA. Bryson, I was kind of out on him. I liked him at the start of his Sabre career because I thought he's a fun little player. He skates well, good puck mover. He's really dynamic the way he moves. And, okay, there could be a real exciting player here. And then he kind of played and it was like, there's nothing really exciting happening. He's not really that bad, though. It's just, I don't know what I'm really getting here. He's not that physical. He's not big. He's not making these wow plays. I mean, in 206 games for the Sabres, he has 4 goals. I know being a defenseman is not about scoring goals, but I mean, come on, we're talking about Matthias Samuelsson level goal production from Jacob Bryson. He's never had more than 10 points in a season, and that includes seasons where he's played 73 games and 59 games. So I'm not getting that pop from him. But the numbers love him. I don't know what it is. It's possession, I guess. It's he's very cool in his own zone. And that's impressive for a player that's only 5 foot. What's his listed size? I'm surprised Hockey Reference actually doesn't. I have his Hockey Reference page open, and they don't have it listed. Very strange. But what is he? 5'10" at best. The other is 5'9". For a 5'9" player, I think he's very calm, cool, and collected in his own zone. I think he's a good zone exit player. I think he's always got his head up. He seems to be under control most of the time. And, man, you better be able to do that with the size disadvantage he has and not putting up a lot of offensive production. So the numbers love him. I kind of want to trust in that. I kind of want to believe that he's a player that's deserving of being in their top 6, playing even if it's only 14, 15 minutes a night. I kind of like that idea for Jacob Bryson. If you look at the 3-year sample size of Bryson as a Buffalo Sabre, I was looking for the percentile on his stuff over at Evolving Hockey. Bryson is a 9. He's almost like Peyton Krebs, I guess, for a defenseman in this area only. 9th percentile offensively, 61st percentile defensively. That's pretty good. He's not very good shorthanded, but even strength defense, I mean, we're talking like a really good defenseman here. Very surprising because, again, not the player I would have predicted when he entered the league at his size. So I think I'd have him in the lineup. Now, he shoots left, and they have a lot of left shot defensemen, and that matters too. It's why guys like Jokiharju and Clifton will get chances over him as well. But I kind of like Jacob Bryson being in my personal top 6 at the start of the season over Connor Clifton. And you didn't really have to invest anything to bring him back. And by the way, they might like the idea of giving him a chance because he's like best friends with everyone on the team. I don't really know if that should matter at this point. It really probably shouldn't, right? Like you're past that. The group has failed as a core so far. You don't get your buddies playing in the lineup just because you're your buddies. They got to perform. But I think Bryson has performed, especially at the end of last season. So that's Bryson. And then Dennis Gilbert, local kid, Williamsville native, from Buffalo, played for the Junior Sabres, and he has been bouncing around the league a little bit. Chicago, got to Calgary, and never really was a full-time regular in the NHL. Never has played more than 34 games, and that was last year where he played his most amount of minutes, 34 games for Calgary. Kind of like Bryson, doesn't put up a lot of numbers. Gilbert's physical. There's a little bit of a bite with Gilbert that you don't have a lot of else in your lineup. Like Clifton gives you a little bit of that. Dahlin gives you that. And then Gilbert gives you that. Gilbert has, in his whole NHL career, and this includes preseason because that's how hockeyfights.com does it, Gilbert has 33 fights in his NHL career. I could look this up, I'm sure. It'd probably take a lot of work. I think I want to predict that the rest of the Sabres combined don't have 33 fights to their name. So Gilbert's a physical player. I watched a couple of his fights on YouTube, and like they all kind of started with him delivering a bone-crushing hit. So big hitter, will drop the gloves, will defend teammates if you need him to. And again, when we go to the numbers, like not bad. Not as bad as you might think. He's not going to wow you. He's not going to be the difference between whether you win or lose. But as long as he doesn't kill you, then that's all you could ask for. Good defensive defenseman, not going to give you anything offensively. That's what we're talking about when it comes to Dennis Gilbert. I would give a puncher's chance, no pun intended, because he's a fighter too. I would give him a puncher's chance to be in the top 6. I think he would have a shot. I really think they all have a shot. I think Ryan Johnson's got the lowest amount of chance. I think Gilbert, Bryson, and Clifton are all equal to me. Like, I might give them each 30% each. 30% for Gilbert, 30% for Bryson, 30% for Clifton, and then 10% for Ryan Johnson. Might be how I would handicap their odds of being that 6th defenseman, if Jokiharju is still here, by the way. And it might depend on what kind of style they want. What kind of style does Lindy want? It could be dependent on who they play. If you are playing a faster team that you're going to need more skating ability against, then maybe you go with a Jacob Bryson. If you're playing a bigger team, a more physical team that you're worried might push you around a little bit, then you go Dennis Gilbert or Connor Clifton. And if Ryan Johnson's great right away, then it's just Ryan Johnson because he has, he's got the youth and he's got the high upside. That's kind of how I see the bottom end of their depth chart right now. And of course, if they traded Henri Jokiharju, it would be 2 spots for those guys instead of 1 spot. So interesting decisions to be had by the Sabres on the blue line, especially in the depths of their blue line coming up this season. I don't expect any more moves other than maybe a Jokiharju trade, but I don't expect an addition. I don't know where that addition would go. Their top 4 is locked in, and their bottom 2 is got 5 guys already competing for it. So do for us today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Oh, I meant to read some text real quick. Let me do that. Looking at some of our text messages, a lot of votes for Jokiharju, of course. If you're not voting for Jokiharju, almost everybody has said, well, that's because I want to trade him. I got a lot of Johnson also as the idea for that. Looking at one comment here from one of our listeners. Here it is. Clifton, Gilbert, bottom pair could be switched out with Bryson depending on the team you're playing. I just kind of said that actually. Love Johnson, but no sense of starting him here if he's not going to play. He'd be my first call up, especially when Samuelsson goes down. That would, I'm assuming, because of injury. Okay. A lot of things that I said on the show that texter just kind of had, but I did not mention the idea of Johnson being the 7th defenseman. This I agree with. Don't have Ryan Johnson here as your 7th. I don't know what the point of that is. If you think he needs more development, a little bit more time in Rochester, and that's why he's not in your top 6, then put him in Rochester. It was a weird amount of games the Sabres had him in Buffalo last year as a healthy scratch. So I wouldn't want to see them do that coming up this season. Another texter, I like Jokiharju, would prefer a top 6 forward if it meant he was a part of the trade. Not one of the smart nerd guys, this texter says, but Bryson impressed me last year. Just hate seeing Clifton's salary for a number 7. Yeah, I think they just have to eat the Clifton. Another texter, Clifton, you're sort of stuck with him. Nobody would claim him off waivers. I'm guessing the Sabres don't want to trade an asset to move him. Gilbert was brought in to make them harder to play against, so it makes sense for him to have a spot. Send Ryan Johnson or AHL. Bryson is the 7th. Trade Jokiharju. I think that might be the most likely outcome. But that texter just wrote down Jokiharju, Ryan Johnson, in Rochester, and Bryson as your 7th defenseman, and I could totally see that being the case. Let me know what you think. You want to let me know what you think. Text line is the good way to do that. Twitter as well at Locked On Sabres on what you would do with the Sabres blue line going into this season. Thanks for listening today to the Locked On Sabres podcast. What are we going to get into our next show? Maybe some trade ideas that might be left over around the league. See if we get any juicy rumors around hockey as well. We'll get some prospect talk in along the way this summer. And yeah, goaltender. That's what I wanted to get to. James Reimer signing last week. We'll do a bit of a breakdown because we've kind of already done that at forward a lot. And we just did this today on defenseman. What about goalie? We'll do that. Levi and Reimer and Luukkonen's contract, all three, whether there's going to be a competition to be the backup, whether what UPL's contract is going to look like, and why I'm starting to mentally prepare for the salary being higher than you might expect with UPL. And I'll let you know what number I've got in mind for him on our next show. So we'll do some goaltender talk coming up next, assuming we don't get a trade between now and then. Thanks for listening to the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.